Can you hear me? Yeah, is it all right? Well, my name is Mark Pilkington. I'm very glad to be with you this afternoon. A little bit of background on me. I've worked for the last 30 years or so in different types of consumer businesses, starting off in manufacturing. Then I did a stint running a wholesale brand, Gossard. Then I did a startup called Splendor.com in 1999 with the backing of Marks & Spencer's Ventures. And lastly, the last 8 or 9 years I've spent running a retail group with about 850 stores. So that's my background. The subject of my talk today is surviving the retail apocalypse. And there are 3 parts to the talk. Firstly, the retail crisis itself. Secondly, the causes of the crisis. And thirdly, what to do about it. Now, the word apocalypse is a strong word, and many people have said, is it really an apocalypse? Some people say it's a revolution. Some people say it's just evolution and it's normal. I'm going to start by nailing my colours to the mast and saying that I actually believe that the word apocalypse is appropriate. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be any stores in the future, or there aren't going to be successful brands, or that the entire structure of retailing as we know it is going to be swept away. That is not going to happen. However, when we look at the last 3 or 4 years, at the statistics and the facts of what's happening in Western retailing, it doesn't make pretty reading. There have been a very large number of closures, a surprising number of bankruptcies, and a lot of major brands under pressure. In fact, I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, the number of brands that have been doing well is very few, and they've been the exception rather than the rule. Let's have a look at the evidence. Let's start in the US, because the apocalypse started in the US, although it's kind of spread to here now. But let's look at America. Those are the store closures over the last 20 years or so, and you can see there's been 2 peaks. One was in 2008, at the height of the Great Recession, and the other one was 2017. In 2017, nearly 9,000 big brand name stores closed, which is 40% more than in 2008. And in 2008, of course, it was a recession, and you expected a lot of stores to close. But in 2017, it wasn't. And 2018, although we haven't got the full data in, also doesn't look very good. American retail's had a bit of help from the Trump tax cuts, which has boosted consumer demand. But nevertheless, the number of closures is still expected to be very high. And there's also been a very large number of bankruptcies. Over 43 major brands. Not all of these brands are famous internationally, but in America, these are big brands. And a lot of them, of course, are famous brands. A lot of these brands have gone bankrupt. Companies like Sears, once the largest retailer in the world, Kmart, Toys R Us, Gymboree, Claire's, Quicksilver. You can see the names there. These are well-known names. But more importantly, as I said earlier, there's almost no brand that is doing extremely well on a consistent basis. And these are examples of brand names that you'd have said 10 years ago would have been pretty much untouchable. They dominated their specific sectors, and yet they too have been under pressure. Brands like Victoria's Secrets, Polo Ralph Lauren, Abercrombie & Fitch, Guess, Giorgio Armani. These are just a few. I've picked them out because they're particularly big brand names. And perhaps more shockingly, around 1/3 of American malls are expected to close over the next few years. There's even a website called deadmalls.com. If you want to really scare yourself, write it down and go and visit. Dead Malls follows the progress or decline of these malls. And again, it's got about 450 malls on it, all the way across America, but particularly in the Rust Belt and the Midwest. And this is a picture of Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio, which, as you can see, it doesn't make a very encouraging sight. These malls used to be a symbol of prosperous American consumerism, and now they're more like a symbol of its decline. Incidentally, just yesterday I read that Amazon is taking over and repurposing this mall as a distribution center, which is a kind of ironic circular phenomenon. And let's remember, all of this has been happening in a growth economy. This is the Dow Jones. Now, we're all aware it's dropped a bit over the last few months. Nevertheless, it's still trading very close to record highs. And we are in the 9th year, or America is in the 9th year of expansion. We haven't had the final figures for GDP last year, but they look as if they're going to come in around 3.5%, which is well above the average over the last few years. And yet, this kind of decimation of American retail has been happening. Now, 9 years is historically a very long time for there to be a growth period. And the question I would leave in your minds is, what's going to happen to American retailing when there's a next big recession? Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, the UK has not been immune from similar types of pressures, which of course in our case has been probably exacerbated by the uncertainty surrounding political developments and Brexit. But we've seen, you know, some very large names that I certainly grew up with being very dominant, get into trouble and go into insolvency, such as House of Fraser, Toys R Us, Mothercare, BHS, New Look, Maplins. And if we look in other countries around the world, I was surprised to see when I reviewed them for my book that although they're at different stages of development, nevertheless, there is hardly an area of the world where retailing is doing well for a variety of reasons. The damage is most severe in areas like the US, Northern Europe, China, Japan, where e-commerce has become more developed and more established. However, e-commerce is growing rapidly in all the countries, and we're beginning to see even other countries starting to exhibit the same symptoms. So that's an overview. It's probably nothing new there for you. It makes depressing reading, and I don't want to focus on that. What I want to focus on is what the solutions are. But before we can understand the solutions, we've got to understand the causes. Because there's a lot of comments going around that it's e-commerce, or that it's government rates, or whatever. But in fact, if we look at the causes of this crisis, they are much more fundamental and much more varied than that. And until we can understand those causes, we're not going to be able to find solutions. Before we look at the causes, let's look at what we are perhaps moving away from. Let's look at what I call the classical retailing model and examine how it worked. At the Industrial Revolution, we saw a revolution, an earthquake in the cost of how goods were manufactured. We went from small craft job shops where everything was made by hand to large automated factories where standardized goods could be churned out in their hundreds of thousands at very low cost. And that revolution is responsible for the prosperity that we now enjoy. It's pulled the world out of poverty in large parts. Now, the corollary to that revolution was that all these masses of goods had to be distributed. You had to find a way to get them from the factory to the consumer. And the answer to that was very simple. It was called shops. The goods from the manufacturers were put in different size spaces, sometimes quite large spaces, on high streets and eventually in malls, shopping centres, where the consumer could come, try them and pick them up and take them home with them. Now, another aspect to it, because as I say, this is wider than just retailing, we're looking at the whole consumer supply chain, is the existence of brands. While things were produced in small craft shops, locally, you knew the reputation of the craftsperson. You didn't need a brand. But as soon as they started being mass-produced in factories far, far away, you needed to have a way of finding out whether they were good or not. And that's why branding came into existence. So brands took the products from the factories, or they developed the products with the factories, they put their brand name on them, they had large marketing budgets to make sure that everyone knew about these products and had trust in these products. They then took them and they shipped them and sold them to retailers who put them in their warehouses. They then took them from their warehouses and they put them in their stores, for which they paid considerable rents, staffing costs, and other costs related to retailing. Now, as that product went down that chain, at each stage, the different players added a markup. The brand took the consumer's product, and in return for stamping their name on it, they more or less multiplied the price by 2 or 3. Then they sold it to the retailer, and in return for putting it in their spaces, the retailer also multiplied on top of that another 2 to 3 times. Now, obviously, markups vary by different types of companies. I'm not going to pretend that I know the markups in your business, but I'm going to tell you on average, the markups, the cumulative markups, were 7 to 8 times. So on average, around the world, products in stores cost 7 to 8 times what they actually cost to produce. Now, this is a supply chain. It's also a push supply chain because it's driven by the logic of the factories. You have to produce a large quantity of a standardized product. So you've got to push it to consumers and persuade them to all buy the same thing. Okay? That's the way you achieve the economies. Now, in order to do that, we've got the marketing from the brands, we've also got the marketing from the retailers. And where does the consumer, under this old model, get their information? They get it from the brands, and they get it from the retailers, who control the communications channels through advertising, through PR, and through the staff talking to consumers. Your average consumer is paying 7 to 8 times the factory cost, despite the fact that the product physically is the same as when it left the factory. And they did this for 2 centuries, 2.5 centuries, because they had no choice. Their choice in terms of where they could buy things was limited to a few shops in their district, in their area. And their information, their access to information, was largely from the brands and retailers themselves. So they are on the receiving end of what is essentially a push system, and that system, as I say, stayed in place for 250 years. So it's a great system, but it has now been challenged by an alternative system of distribution. And just as the Industrial Revolution was a revolution in manufacturing, this, what we're going to go through, is, in my belief, a revolution in how things are distributed. And it affects both brands and retailers. The first and most obvious thing that changed was that there was now an alternative way of getting goods from factories to consumers, and that was through e-commerce. Now, I know mail order had existed before, but mail order had its own fairly substantial drawbacks and challenges, which kept it at maybe 2 to 3% of the market. E-commerce is like mail order on steroids. It's the first time that a really major threat has emerged, a major alternative has emerged for how you buy things. Now, e-commerce has 5 key advantages, what I call the 5 C's. Cost, convenience, choice, control, and customer service. Okay, let's just run through them. Now, leaving aside the cost of marketing, of customer acquisition, which I know is a major issue, which we'll come back to, the actual physical cost of using a website and a centralized distribution center to move goods from a factory to consumers, the cost of fulfillment itself is 8 to 12% of sales. The cost of running a stores business, it varies, but I've put 30 to 40% of sales. So there's obviously there a big discrepancy. And as I say, leave aside the question of how you recruit customers. That's purely the cost of fulfillment. So stores are quite an expensive way, quite an expensive fixed asset way of fulfilling goods to consumers. And secondly, apart from the actual cost of the stores themselves, you've got the cost of the stock. Now, I don't know here whether people are independent retailers or whether you've got multiple stores. But I'm just going to talk about multiple stores for the minute. If you've got multiple stores, which is the kind of business I was in, every year I would take my collection and I would copy stamp it 850 times and put it in 850 different locations. And on the first day, people would come in and start buying it, which meant I went out of stock on my best sellers in my best locations. Meanwhile, I was overstocked on my bad sellers in my lower locations. And at the end of the season, I had to job all that off. So the stock system is not a very efficient system. And in fact, in the States, out of stocks cost retailers 15% of potential sales every year. And they lose another 2% of that stock through shrinkage. So it's difficult to protect and look after all that stock and keep it in the right places at the right times. That stock duplication effort can be compared with, if you like, the simple view of an e-commerce business with one distribution center and one stock. So e-commerce businesses are in stock more, for any given level of overall stock, they tend to be in stock more of the time, and that's a big advantage. Turning to convenience. Depending on the circumstances and your mood, it can certainly be a lot more convenient to buy things whenever you want on your phone with one click and have them delivered to your home than it is to go to a store. Now, there's all different types of stores and there's all different types of experiences, right? You've got grocery at one end and you've got, you know, going out and getting a nice dress or something pleasurable at the other end, okay? And I understand that those are different sorts of experiences, but overall, and again, depending on the country and the weather and the traffic and the parking and everything like that, it can definitely be more convenient to buy over the internet. And in fact, in the US, 67% of millennials prefer buying online, and the main reason they cite for it is convenience. Thirdly, we have choice. The fact is that what you can fit on a website, because it's just electronic, is much greater for any given level of cost than what you can fit in a four-walled store. For example, Best Buy is one of the largest electronics retailers in the world, and they have huge stores. And they sell, in their televisions department, they sell 80 options of television. And when you see it, it's very impressive. It's huge, huge ranks of televisions all laid out. And it looks good. But if you go to Amazon and put televisions in, there's over 500,000 options. So in terms of choice, what can be offered online dwarfs what can be offered in a physical store. Fourthly, control. Now, I'm a retailer, and you know, I would always say, yeah, my stores are great. You know, if someone asked me, I'd say, well, we do a great job, the team does a great job, we do a fabulous job. But I know that in my own business, when I was in that business, a lot of the time, I didn't really know what was happening in these 850 locations. Okay, I couldn't possibly control what was happening in these 850 locations simultaneously. I was employing a lot of minimum wage staff, okay? And I was expecting them to deliver fantastic customer service on all times, at all times, despite the fact that their work was backbreaking, and actually they had tough lives. I was expecting, for example, all my stores were in stock, but as we've already seen, they weren't. They were out of stock. And product information in stores, you'd try and put the product information out there on packaging or point of sale, but very often it really was, honestly, it was lacking. Now you compare that with the internet as it is now, not as it was 20 years ago when I started, when it was very inefficient in lots of ways. But now the best internet companies, they lay out the product information very clearly, they have great search engines. The service is not as good as the best retail experience with a live human, intelligent, sentient being, but it's standardized. You always get the same service every single time, so it's not variable. So what you see is what you get. And in terms of, as we've seen, in terms of being in stock, which is a very big item, they tend to be in stock more of the time. So control is a big thing that they have that retailing struggles with. If you've got your own store and you're an owner, I don't know how many people here are store owners? Okay, we've got quite a lot. Now, I'm sure you control your stores very tightly, but as you move into bigger store groups and things like that, it becomes more difficult. And lastly, what I call customer relationships. Having all the information in one place, on one database, has given the e-commerce companies a huge advantage in terms of data analytics. They've collected all the information about their customers. They know what they buy, when they buy, how often they buy. They are able to analyze it. They're able to apply sophisticated algorithms to it. They have a lot of technology people who are innovating in this area, and they're able to personalize the service and run very, very good customer relationship management programs. All of those things, although we try and do them in retail, it is harder. For a start, the stuff is often in different places. We may have a store database. Is that the same as the internet customer database? So these are just a quick summary of what I see as the advantages of e-commerce. And armed with these advantages, the e-commerce players have chipped away at retail for the last 20 years. I mean, I started my business in 1999, and we all thought we were going to put the retailers out of business at that time, and then 2 years later, most of us went bankrupt, and it didn't happen. But nevertheless, over a period of time, it has started to happen. If you look at the growth rate this is global retail, the whole world, it's been average 4% over the last 4 years, whereas e-commerce has grown by 72%. And though the overall global market share is only 10%, as we say, it's varying by country. In the US, it's estimated at around 13%. In the UK, it's nearly reached 20% last year. And in China, it's reached already 25%. But wherever you look, it's growing very, very fast. So we can expect these percentages to grow. Now, e-commerce has come in two types of formats. One we're very aware of, which is what we call the large online marketplace, right? The Amazons, the Alibabas. These companies are missing out the retail stage and offering a very, very large number of brands at a somewhat reduced price. There is another model that you need to be aware of if you're not already, which is called the direct-to-consumer model, which has emerged more recently, really in the period 2010 to 2014. And this, if we go back to our supply chain, not only misses out the retail stage, it also misses out what we call the traditional brand stage. These are companies, very, very lean companies, working directly with manufacturers and bringing the product directly to people under their own new brands. And they have been able to offer products of a quality and of an image that is radically beyond the prices they're charging for them. So these guys are really revolutionizing the supply chain, missing out two stages. And the way they do their marketing has been different. We'll look at that later on. But they're not using the big sales forces, and they're not using the big conventional marketing budgets of the traditional brands. So these are the two models. And that's how e-commerce is impacting things. But the revolution that we're seeing goes well beyond just e-commerce. And this is a very, very, very important point. It's also an informational revolution. The new technology has not just delivered a new way of fulfilling goods, it's also delivered a new way of communicating. And this, if anything, is even greater in its potential impact. And it's interesting that since this developed, which developed later than e-commerce, it's accelerated e-commerce's growth enormously. The two are working in tandem. This information revolution, which we see around us in social media, in peer-to-peer reviews, in the influencers, the growth of online bloggers and influencers, and in price comparison sites, has upended the retail and brand control of information, which, remember earlier on we saw they had a total grip on that information. Nowadays, the consumer's in a very different position from before. Not only do they have the choice, not of a few stores in their area, but of almost a limitless choice of online stores, they also have access to almost perfect information. Woe betide the brand or the retailer that has a problem with their product. In the old days, if you had a problem with the product, you might tell your family and friends. I think they used to say people told 7 people. Well, nowadays, you can tell 7 million people that there's a problem with this product if it goes viral. So it's a very risky situation for suppliers. And conversely, if you have a great product, that can go viral too. So the grip that the brands had over people's minds. Look at some of those brands we were looking at earlier on. Polo Ralph Lauren, Victoria's Secrets, the grip they had on the consumer's mind. I know I was one of them. I used to live in Ralph Lauren. You know, it had a grip of my mind. But now it's been undermined, and there's an alternative way of getting very large numbers of consumers to find out about your product over the social media, and that is not through conventional advertising, it's through peer-to-peer spreading of information. And if you've got a product or a service that is revolutionary enough, it will go without you paying for it. All you do is you get it to your enthusiasts, fire them up, and they do it for you. This is a revolution in information. There's a theory in economics. Who studied economics here? Anybody? Economics A-level? Yes? One? There's a theory called perfect competition. One of the conditions for perfect competition is perfect knowledge. You've got perfect knowledge now. And one of the predictions of perfect competition is that supplier margins profits will get eroded. And that's what's happening. Then on top of that, we've got what we call the generational revolution. Baby boomers, which controlled consumption for many, many years, are retiring. They're moving on to other types of spending. And the millennials and Generation Z that are growing up now are growing up in fundamentally different economic circumstances. People in the UK over 45 control 85% of the wealth in the UK, and those under 45 only control 15% of the wealth. These new generations that are growing up are growing up in different circumstances from their forebears. When the baby boomers were growing up, it was a growth economy. You had good jobs with good incomes. You had generous pensions. And above all, you had access to relatively, in real terms, cheap property. So when you got to 25, 26, 30, you were already looking to buy your first home. And then you'd get married, and then you'd have kids, and you'd set up, and you'd fill that home with stuff, and then you'd try and build or get bigger homes over time that you fill with even more stuff. Now, that is not happening for these new generations. They've grown up with the Great Recession and the aftermath of that. They've grown up with a lot of student debt. They've grown up with the gig economy, where jobs are less well protected, and except in certain glorious sectors, are less well paid. They don't have very good pension arrangements. And above all, they do not have access to affordable property. And as a result, statistically, many of them are choosing to get married later, delay having children, and delay setting up homes. The proportion of people under the age of 30 living with their parents is higher now than it's been since 1940. Okay? And if you've got a room at your parents' house, you don't have a lot of space to put a lot of products. So no wonder these generations are choosing to have experiences rather than products. And their attitudes to brands is very, very different from before. Because linked to all these changes, we're seeing a branding revolution. We talked earlier about how the information monopoly of the brands and the retailers had been broken, and how that had opened the floodgates to lots of startups. It's never been easier to launch a startup. All the young people want to launch startups, and they can do it through a website. It's much easier than before. And the amazing thing to me, having been over 30 years in the branding industry, is that the big brand reputations and the big brand images of the big brands is no longer affording them very much protection against these new brands. In my day, if you wanted to launch a new brand, you'd better have a lot of money, because 9 out of 10 new brands fail. Now that's all changed. Younger consumers actively seek new brands, new quirky brands. They don't want to buy the brands that their parents bought. And they see through, they have so much more information, they can easily see through the brand premiums and the brand images, and they look at it and they say, I am not the Polo Ralph Lauren man. I am not the Victoria's Secret woman. And they have the confidence to do that. In America, more than half the market is plus size. So when you look at the Victoria's Secret's image with its 7-foot-tall Eastern European supermodels dressed up with the angels, I think they call them, that doesn't correspond with the way that women see themselves now in America. And there are new brands in that space coming up that are marketing in a completely different way, and they let their customers do the advertising, and the customers, there's a brand called Aerie, they run a campaign called #AerieReal, and if you look at #AerieReal, you will see loads and loads of women of all different shapes and sizes having a great time in their underwear. Just hanging out in their underwear. It's a different sort of underwear, it's more relaxed, it's more sporty. It's the antithesis of Victoria's Secret. But what they're really celebrating is their own validity, their own diversity, and not wanting to be squeezed into this image that has been created by this brand and imposed on them. It's a complete revolution. It's moving away from a push system to a pull system. And the brands that understand that, the new brands, are involving their customers much more. And they are building share very, very fast. So we're seeing a revolution in branding as well. And then the last reason, the last cause, if you like, of the retail apocalypse is what I call retail complacency. Now, I say that because, as I say, 20 years ago, everyone thought that the internet was going to destroy retailing, and then it didn't. And I think in the aftermath of the dot-com bust, a lot of retailers breathed a sigh of relief and said, okay, we'll keep on going. We'll build internet businesses alongside our stores business, and we'll trade through both. And they didn't understand, perhaps, how powerful the new channel was going to be, and therefore they did not really focus enough resources or get the right kind of people to be able to build significant size internet businesses. And even though they had businesses and they were growing at 20 or 30% per annum, and they put that in their annual reports, it was 20 or 30% of nothing. And they didn't move their cultures. The fast-moving .com companies were technologists. Most of the people in these companies are technologists. I spoke with a senior marketing person for Facebook, and he told me that all the Facebook marketing people are engineers. They are all able to program their own promotions and marketing campaigns. So when you're working for Facebook, you can't say, I want to run a campaign, I'll give it to the IT department. There is no IT department. Everyone is IT, and they're expected to do it themselves. Now, that makes them much more fast-moving. Retail's been very centralized. It's been very top-down. Give it to the IT department, and it's been very slow-moving. And as a result of all of that, this is the situation by 2017, which is that Amazon has been permitted, these huge retailers like JCPenney and Sears and Macy's and Walmart, who controlled the landscape in the 1990s, have permitted Amazon to obtain over 40% of this fastest growing channel. And the top 7 retailers between them only have 11% between them. And that's the bad news. The worst news is the ongoing technology revolution is going to continue to favor the e-commerce players. There's a lot of information in here. I'll just give you a quick summary. The final mile of delivery is one of the biggest challenges for internet businesses. We're all aware of those challenges. But things like street robotics and automated door opening or automated ports, what we call ports, that will be built into the size of apartments or apartment buildings or houses, will enable delivery to be much, much easier. The whole mobile revolution, with the built-in payment system and the built-in signatures, is making it so much easier to transact online on your phone from anywhere. The development of smart speakers, although they're in the early stages, it is thought that in the future that a lot of ordering of basics particularly is going to be handled through smart speakers without necessarily even tapping anything in on a keyboard. That rather small picture there is something, again, you should all look at. It's called the Magic Leap Whale. Write it down, the Magic Leap Whale. It shows an enormous whale emerging out of the floor of a gymnasium in front of about 300 extremely surprised children, and it's done through virtual reality. It's extremely impressive. And virtual reality is going to make buying things online more and more and more realistic and more akin to what you actually get when you go in a store. Big data, we've talked about data analytics, but as the data technology grows, and with the commerce companies' great strength in data analytics, it's bound to favor them in terms of understanding and personalizing customer services. The Internet of Things, things like smart fridges, smart larders, smart bins. You know, there's a bin now where as you use something and you throw it in the bin, you wave the barcode on the packaging over it and it'll order you another one. Smart fridges that tell you what you've got in your fridge. Smart larders that reorder things as you start to run out of them. And lastly, on the manufacturing side, manufacturing's become much more flexible in many areas. It's much easier to start businesses now because so much of the manufacturing can be done. You can order 400 or 500 of something instead of the old days when you used to have to order 10,000 of them. And one of the biggest areas that's exciting is 3D digital printing, where you can literally print anything. You can print one of a thing very efficiently. It's in its early stages, but it's going to be big. So this technology revolution is going to continue to favor the development of the new type of supply chain I've talked about. So, in summary, I see retail as being like the Titanic. It can look very impressive. It can look very glossy. You've got the big stores. You've got the big brands. You go to the big malls. But my view is that it's holed beneath the waterline. And water is seeping in. And just as the Titanic didn't look as if it was going to sink about 3 or 4 hours after it hit the iceberg, remember the band played on, everyone continued to dance and party, but nevertheless, the water was coming in. And the problem for retailing is that, like the Titanic, it's a rather top-heavy structure. It's got a lot of fixed costs, the cost of the stores, principally. And therefore, there's not really a retailer in the world who can afford to lose more than 10 or 20% of their sales before they start to get into considerable trouble. It's all top slice in retailing. It's that top slice that pays for everything. So, and we've seen what happens as retailers start to go down, because they've got so many legacy assets on their balance sheets. They've got the stores. As they close the stores, it decimates their balance sheets. As they lay people off with all the pension liabilities, it can decimate their valuations. The damage to their brands after they go bankrupt, there's a lot of evidence that when brands go bankrupt, now everyone sees the news, the sales plummet in the quarters that follow, even though they've been restructured and they're still trading, the sales plummet. We've seen that with House of Fraser, we've seen that with Mothercare, and therefore the brand damage of going into decline is very, very considerable. And that's the end of my talk. Okay, I'm joking. So all of that makes pretty scary viewing. Okay, what are the rules for survival? Okay, now, some of these rules are going to seem controversial, okay? But I beg you to just open your minds and think. I've analyzed all of this, and I promise you that a lot of other things have been tried, and it hasn't worked, okay? So, you know, I know that retailers are being told to do this, that, the other, and invest in this technology and that technology, but none of that's all been done, and it hasn't saved a lot of these retailers. So we need something more fundamental. Okay, the first rule is what I call go with the flow. Now, this is the big picture thing. It's not detailed. If we believe that e-commerce is a more efficient way of getting goods from factories to consumers, I don't talk about marketing, just physically distributing, fulfilling goods from factories to consumers, because of the reasons we've talked about earlier on, the choice, the cost, the control, convenience, etc., etc. If it's got these big advantages in fulfillment, and if the technology trends are going to further enhance those advantages even more, then, to me, that is the flow of history. And we need to go with the flow of history. We mustn't be closed-minded about it. We have to look at it in a clear-eyed way and say, what exactly do our stores bring to our picture? Am I my stores, or am I my customers? And if there's a better way of getting things to my customers, because at the moment they're mine, shouldn't I be looking at those things? Yeah? Rather than saying, no, I love my store. It reminds me of the old days when I used to work in manufacturing and the Far East was competing with the manufacturers, and I used to have conversations with the factories, particularly the high-end factories, Calais lace, Swiss embroidery. They were premium products. And I used to say, you must move your production to China. And they used to say no, because nobody can make lace like the Calais lace makers. Nobody can make embroidery like the Swiss. And I was like, yeah, great, but do you have like more hands or more eyes than the Chinese? You know, is there something fundamentally different about you that they can't copy? And they're like, well, you know, we love our factories and our factories are fantastic. They were in love with their factories. But their real business was a customer business. And how they got what the customer needed was up to them, wasn't it? They could have got it here or they could have got it there. The key thing was to look after the customers. And I believe something of the same is happening with the stores business. I think a lot of retailers love their stores. They're very protective of their stores. But stores are just a means to an end. The real end is the customer, is servicing the customer. So, okay, if retailing and direct fulfillment is a more efficient way of getting goods from factories to consumers, then should you be putting all the goods through your stores? Okay, should you be taking these products down this long line from the factory to the brand to the retail warehouse to another prettier warehouse called a store, and then finally to the consumer? Or should you be trying to, I'm not talking about going to the store now, I'm talking about should all the goods be going via the store? Because it's a very long route. There's a lot of stock tied up in that route at any given time. And as the stock's tied up in it, you've got a lot of risk as well, you know? Because it takes a long time to get to people, and if it's not good, it'll take a long time for you to find out. So, what I'm suggesting is this. If some smart e-commerce company, some marketplace like Amazon or Alibaba, or some smart direct consumer company is going to come along and take your customer anyway using the 5 advantages I've described, if that's going to happen anyway, wouldn't it be better if you persuaded your customers to buy on your cheaper, through your cheaper, lower cost internet distribution platform, your own. People are going to come into your stores and they're going to look at your products and they're going to try them on and they're going to try them and then they're going to go on their phones and they're going to find somewhere cheaper to buy them online. That's called showrooming. Does that happen? Does that happen to anybody? Okay, it happens to everybody. That's what's happening. And sometimes they do it in the store in front of you, you know? So my question is, if they're going to do that, isn't it better that you do that? Now that means separating in your mind the cost of doing it through the store and the cost of doing it through your internet channel. And if you understand that the cost to do it through your internet channel is actually lower, it may not look lower, but it actually is. If you ever did it again directly, it would be lower. It wouldn't have the 30 to 40% store cost. I know you've still got it, but just suspend that in your minds. It's actually lower cost to do it directly. Once you've moved them onto your website, you then have the potential ability to enjoy all the advantages that the e-commerce players have had in terms of low cost of remarketing, in terms of data analytics, understanding your customers better and being able to remarket to them. You know, when I started buying things from Amazon, it probably cost them, you know, whatever it costs, over $200 or $300 to recruit me. You know, they had to do all that advertising to get me to try it the first time. Now I'm signed up to Prime, and I do virtually nothing else. It costs them nothing to market to me because I just swipe, boom. It takes me the same amount of time to buy on Amazon Prime as it does to put it on my shopping list in the old days. So it's costing them nothing to market to me. So although the cost of acquiring a customer online is very high, the cost of remarketing to customers online is far, far lower. You don't have to use the cost of the stores every single time to get that customer. You can do it directly. Now, one of the reasons that retailers have struggled to build good online businesses is because of the high cost of customer acquisition. It's high anyway. It's high for the e-commerce companies, and they're really good at it. It's been shockingly high for the retailers, which is why all the retailers didn't build or haven't built big online businesses. It's discouraging. It's so expensive to recruit customers. Now, here's a much cheaper way of recruiting customers to an online business. You've got the customers coming into your store every day. You've got them there. All you have to do is put an internet terminal in your store, sell it to them in the normal way, but when they come to actually want to buy it, you say to them, okay, you can either buy it at this price, and I'll give it to you now, or if you sign up to my website, I'll deliver it to you today or early tomorrow for free at 10% less or 15% less. Okay? Now you have to play with that because you don't know at what point they're going to migrate. But I can assure you that whatever it is, it's going to be a heck of a lot less than it would cost you to recruit someone online to an online business from scratch, okay, using online marketing. This is potentially extremely low cost recruitment medium. Now at the moment, like, you know, in America, you've got these big retail groups. They've got 30, 40, 50, 90 million customers going in their doors every week. They've got all these people there, but they're seeping away. They're seeping away. And my argument is, grab them while you've still got them. Grab them and move them into your ecosystem rather than let them go into somebody else's ecosystem. Now, if you can get more of your customers to accept that route, right, it has a number of implications, right? Your store does not primarily have to be a place where you hold stock, okay? One of the reasons that stores have to be the size they are is because they're actually full of a lot of stock. And I think of the big American big box department stores, which have just got room after room after room full of things like TVs and mattresses and, you know, it's stock. And that's what's taking up all the space. The bit where they actually deal with the customer is very, very small. And if you start to take the stock out and you do more of your stock fulfillment directly, you can potentially shrink your store footprint. Okay, now this is important. You may not want to shrink your store footprint because you may like your store the way it is, but it's going to be essential that you reduce your costs, because if you don't reduce your costs, you're not going to be competitive. If you keep the stores the way they are, you're not going to be competitive with the online players. I know this sounds like heresy, but it's really important. Those stores are big fixed assets and they cost a lot of money, and they're costing more all the time with the rates and all those other things. And the point is, you have to use them every single time to remarket to your customers. Take the strain off the store and put a load of your customers online where the cost of marketing is much lower. You can have a different sort of store. Now, it's not just about shrinking it, okay? It's about what you can do with the space. But the point is that you should see stores as brand recruitment points, not as the main way that you fulfill products. Because using stores to fulfill products, as we've seen, is a very expensive way of moving products from factories to consumers. It's a very expensive way of doing that, okay? You can do it more cheaply directly. What do you do with the space that you liberate? You can use part of it to create brand theatre. Now, I know there's a lot about this. This bit isn't particularly new, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it. But the point is, what people never say, they always say create brand theatre, invest in all these new technologies. They never show you how to save money. Now, if your business is doing this because of the apocalypse or whatever, and you've got to spend all this extra money, and no one is showing you how to save the money, you're not going to be able to do it. And that's what happened to the big retailers. They couldn't simultaneously build their online businesses, put technology in their stores and make them more theatrical, and deal with the fact that their business was going down. So the two go together. You take cost out of one thing and you put it into another, yeah? That's practical. Now, you can use it in two major ways. Firstly, remember you're a brand, okay? You've got to do something with your brand in your store that you couldn't do online or that somebody else couldn't do online. Now, what can be done in stores that can't be done online yet is to create this kind of 3D experience. So that's where the investment in having a great brand experience. Invest in the seating areas and where the customer, make the customer interaction area bigger, make it more comfortable. Offer free coffee and maybe a free beer, depending on what business you're in, or free glass of wine. Those are very, very important because they can't do that online. And above all, your staff, right? As you take the strain off the stock fulfillment element, the staff role changes. Over 50 in the States, over 50% of staff time is spent on stock processing. Okay? A very and another big percent is spent on till processing. So basic functions. That's what makes the work so backbreaking. And that's what's also, you need a lot of people to do all that work, so it ends up being a minimum wage job because, you know, you can't afford to pay people lots and lots of money. Now, if you take that function away, they can focus on customers. You can even have different sort of person. You can afford to, you probably don't need as many people, but you can pay them more money and have better people. Because again, that's something the internet can't do. We've said at the very beginning that nothing matches a brilliant person in a store who really knows a lot about the business. But as it's a minimum wage thing at the moment, they move on and all the training you give them is wasted, etc. If you could pay them better, have fewer of them, and focus them on customer service, get rid of all the basic functions, and focus on making that experience a Rolls-Royce experience for the customers. Now, the other thing you can do is use your stores to create what we call third spaces. Now, the idea of the third space is a concept that was developed a few years ago, which is between the home and the work is the third space. And the classic example of a third space is Starbucks. It's a place where you go to hang out, okay? Now, your brands, your stores, your brands, your customer bases have a certain meaning. Your brand has a meaning for your customers. Something brings your customers in. What is that magic sauce? What is it that you share? You probably have a passion for what you do, right? You have a passion for what you do. Some of your customers share that passion, right? How can you make that more? How can you turn this into a community? There's some really great examples of this. There's a cycling company called Rafa Cycling, and they've turned their stores into what they call clubhouses, and in return for a small annual fee, you not only get benefits like special trips and special equipment and lower costs of equipment, etc., etc. You also get to hang out in the clubhouse and have free food and free coffee. So what do all the cyclists do? They hang out in Rafa. And as they hang out as a community with staff members who are also passionate about cycling, a fantastic thing happens. Because what better place to incubate new ideas, to find out what customers think about different products than that? It becomes a friendly community experience. Lululemon with the yoga classes. Lululemon sells athletic products mainly to women. But what do they really sell? Lululemon was one of the first brands to sports brands for women, okay? Because sports brands 20 years ago, it was all very masculine, right? And they came along and they said, no, we're going to do this thing with women. And they do a lot of activities with women. And Lululemon is not really about sports clothing. That's the least of it. It's about empowerment. It's about self-fulfillment. And they celebrate that by doing these activities in their stores. Apple's another great example. I mean, you go into an Apple store, you've got young experts in IT telling you about interesting things you can do. They can repair your devices. Young people kind of hang out in the stores and compare things. It's a meeting place. I do not believe for 1 minute that the future lies with all of us sitting in our rooms on our phones. We're social animals. We like to go out and do things. The more you can make your store into a community clubhouse for your brand community, where you share with your enthusiastic customers your enthusiasm and passion for the brand, the better it's going to be. Now, we've talked about technology, and I put this low down the list because everyone is probably pushing technology at you, you know. You go to these fairs, retail fairs, not so much this one because it's more product, but I go to a lot of retail fairs and it's all full of people selling technology. I think the technology is important, but you have to understand why you're using it, and you've got to get the big picture. I mean, there are 3 areas where it can help. Automating basic functions. There's no point in having your staff spend their time processing tills. You hand that to the consumer through an automated processing of the payment. You can invest in the experience through things like interactive digital displays. Those are very useful because the customer can come in and it may recognize them and it knows what they like and it feeds them you know, what they like, or they pick up a product and it'll show them that product on someone who looks like them, all those kind of good things. It can also be just very impressive just from a branding point of view. And you can use it also to understand your customer journey better. So who's walking past your stores, who's coming in, have they bought there before, can you pull up their past purchases for your staff to see so that they know what kind of things they like, where do they get switched on by things, where do they leave, like mapping of stores. So those are the 3 areas you can use technology. Marketing. Okay, we've talked about marketing moving from push to pull. This is very important. The traditional means of marketing through magazines and TV and all those kind of things is dying. And more of the marketing is taking place over social media. But the problem with social media is that what do people do on social media? They want to see their friends. They do not want to see adverts. And when brands try and move their traditional advertising on social media, it doesn't work. There's lots and lots of evidence that brands are wasting money on that. What works on social media is a story, is a real story. Like this guy, he created a real story, you know? He created this revolution, and we've probably all got them in our pockets now because of that revolution. You've got to become the conversation. You can't just buy people's attention anymore. You have to earn it. And that means you have to do something different. I'd almost say do anything different. You know, launch a stool with 1 leg or something, or you know, launch a bra with 3 straps or 3 cups, or do something that's going to catch people's attention. I'm joking a little bit there, but you've got to catch people's attention by innovating, by doing something different. You can't just throw money at the problem of marketing anymore. This goes back to what I talked about the supply chain. You've got to ruthlessly eliminate stages and costs from your supply chain, right? If you are a retailer selling brands, okay, how many people here have a retail shop that sells brands? Lots of people, okay. That is a very long supply chain. That's going to give you the markups we've talked about, the 7 to 8 markups. That is not competitive in the long term, okay? Someone is going to find a way. A smart direct-to-consumer brand is going to find a way to move that same product, or even a better product, to the consumer from the factory at a lower price. That's a fact. Okay? And although we've talked a lot about customer service and all those good things, at a certain level, if the price is different enough, people are going to move. Okay? So you've got to ruthlessly squeeze costs out of your supply chain. And when I say your supply chain, I mean your whole supply chain, not just the bit you look after. Okay? If you're a retailer, you've got to, again, controversial, but I'll say it, you've got to start to move towards private label. The manufacturing volumes now are much, much lower. People who've got stands here probably don't want me to say this. If you're a retailer, you've got to start to develop your private label because you're paying a heck of a lot of money for that brand name on it. Remember, by putting that brand name on it, it becomes 3 times the price. You don't have to do that. You can just get it from the factory. Secondly, all the things we've talked about. You've got to, you know, again, if you're a small retailer in a tiny shop, this is going to sound ridiculous, okay? So please, you know, I'm trying to talk about all retailing, okay? But you've got to try and shrink your store costs. You've got to use your costs only for those bits that only they can do. and not for anything else, because the more you leave in there, the more it's going to cost you, okay? The more it's going to make you uncompetitive. Okay, so use the store for what it can exclusively do, and what it can exclusively do mainly really, really well is to recruit customers. Okay, and get them into your online business for where you can service them on a repeat basis more cheaply. Okay, that's the magic element the store adds. Now, if the cost of your store is higher, the cost per customer is higher than what you recruit people online, you should dump the store completely, which I don't believe. I believe the store is still potentially a lower cost medium for recruiting customers. But that's the way you should gauge it. If it's costing you $100 to get a customer by online marketing, and per customer from this store, per new customer, this store is costing you $200, then the store's not competitive. You might as well just go online and do it online. Do you see what I mean? Okay? Don't be too in love with your store. It's just a means to an end. You need to think about also other things. You see, is having that store in the same place all the time, is that a good thing or not? Because if what you're essentially trying to do with your stores is recruit customers, get them onto your online system, and then service them online at low cost, maybe you should look at moving your store around, because once you've been in a location, you may have hit all your demographic in the first 6 months. That's why pop-up stores are exploding. It's because you want to go to different high-traffic locations, cull a lot of people, sounds bad, recruit a lot of people, harvest a lot of people, and then move on to another location where you haven't hit all your potential target group. Because once you've been there for a year or so, maybe you've got all the ones you're going to get. You know? It's possible. So anyway, the point is, squeeze the costs out of the system. You have to do it. Because believe me, other people will be. And if you can't match them, they're going to win. We've talked a bit about this, so I'm not going to repeat it all. But the key thing now is you have to see your brand in a different way. It's not a push system anymore. You don't define the brand anymore. You need to see yourself as the curator of a community. Right? Imagine you're a group of friends, you all like the same things, and you put your hand, and someone says, I wonder if we could get some of this stuff better. You know, we're all buying it individually, and it's cost a lot of money. Could someone maybe put all of our stuff together and get a better deal? That's how it is. And then you put your hand up and say, actually, I could do that. That's the role that you have. It's a community. It's interactive. Bring them into it. Ask them about products. Get their ideas. Get them to test the products. And above all, get them to market the products. Get your team to market the products. I mean, any retailer who says, my team cannot post things about my brand, which many retailers would say, is losing a huge opportunity, because many of our teams have big social followings of their own and are equally passionate about the product as we are. So it's you, the team, the customers, you are all one. You don't enjoy a superior position where you tell them all what to do. You're all one, and what unites you is your passion, and let them co-create it. They'll love it. That's how you get people these days. And linked to that is the idea of the higher purpose. And this is for employees and it's for customers. Just selling stuff doesn't work anymore. The really successful new brands are helping the world, giving back to the world at the center of what they do, whether it's helping the environment, whether it's helping people's health, whether it's just helping people generally and being extremely charitable. And I don't mean just some odd activity that's tacked onto the business to sort of please, to make the company look good. It isn't about that. It has to have some fundamental purpose. And many of these companies, these direct-to-consumer companies, like Warby Parker, for example, they sell eyeglasses, and for every pair of eyeglasses they sell, they give one to people in poor countries. They do eye tests for free, etc., etc. Everlane, which is a fashion company, direct-to-consumer company, very big in the States, they've made their thing about the factories. They look after the people in the factories. They go and build new buildings. They personally, the people from the company, go every year in their holidays and go and build schools and hospitals for their workers. You know, that's what it's about. And that also motivates the staff. It's very, very important. And lastly, take the hack away. Now, what do I mean by the hack away? It sounds funny. I know Mark Zuckerberg's not very popular anymore, but when he started Facebook, he defined the culture of Facebook as being what he called the hack away. And the hack away is the opposite of the centralized retailing culture. It's a decentralized system whereby young engineers are encouraged to go off and develop new things on their own. And because it's so measurable and you can test things so easily, it enables them to do it. Now, this may not be appropriate to smaller businesses, but it's very important in the bigger retail businesses, they shift their culture. One retailer that's shifting its culture is Walmart. They hired a guy called Mark Law, by buying his company, Jet.com, for $3 billion about 3 years ago. They've put Mark Law in charge of all their internet assets, and he's introducing this hacker culture into Walmart. And as a result, their results are going through the roof. He's brought in a lot of technology people, and they're really investing in that technology. And that's an example of a huge retailer doing that. But culturally speaking, it's really, really important to move away from the very centralized approach. So, sorry that was rather long, and probably a bit emotional in places, but let me just summarize it. There is a crisis in Western retailing. I think we can't hide from it. Hiding from it has not worked for the last 20 years. We have to face it. It's going to spread around the world. It's already definitely in Britain. It's very, very badly in Britain. It's got multiple and complex causes. It's not just about e-commerce, remember. It's about the whole supply chain. And I believe that these changes taken together represent the biggest revolution in the way things are produced and distributed since the Industrial Revolution. And as that was a revolution in manufacturing, this is a revolution in distribution. And it's going to have an effect every bit as much. It is probable in a few years' time that people will be buying things at a much lower markup on factory costs, yes? They're not going to be buying things at 7 or 8 times the factory cost. They're going to be buying them 1, 2, maybe 3, whatever, a much lower amount. I don't know where it's going to end up. And therefore, you have to take that into account and get ready for it. In order to survive, the changes needed are fundamental and radical, and they seem like, you know, that I'm knocking down the church, if you know what I mean. And I'm a retailer like most of you, okay? So I understand how it feels, but I can't see any other way. These are the rules, just to summarize them. You can take a photograph of them, or I can give you a discount on my book if you want to read that. You know, I won't go through them again. And I believe that if you take these rules and you apply them from now, as quickly as you can, in the ways that are appropriate to your business, I know every business is different, that they will help guide you into the future and hopefully ensure that you have a prosperous business in the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. We've got time for one quick question if anyone wants to ask one. But I'm sure he'll be able to mingle. Oh, there we go. You okay for one question?
Hello.
Hi.
My name's Mel. And
Hi, Mel.
Hello. I'm from Wincanton and Somerset, and I'm about to start up a community interest company.
What, sorry?
A community interest company.
Community interest company, yes.
I want to know, I've been really interested in hearing what you've said, and what I want to know is, could we take that and put it in our high streets and get our high streets to collaborate and make them survive?
I haven't covered it today, but there's a chapter in the book which is about shared community shopping spaces, right? Because all the things we've talked about today are applied even more so to a group of retailers operating in one shared community. I think that whether it's a mall or whether it's a high street, if the community, including the government and non-profit organizations and retailers and other public institutions can get together and actually work together to create something unique and live and communal with a really exciting, live, unique feel to it, maybe using local products or whatever, that you can't get online, then I think that can be very powerful. And there's and adding other activities like entertainment into it. I mean, there's some really good examples of high streets where that's happened. There's a place called Stockton in the northeast of England, which is, it was a declining industrial town, etc. And they've put together a new shopping ethos, which is really around community and around activities. And they have, for example, the Stockton Riverside Festival, which is a huge music and creative festival there. And they've built facilities in among the shops where they have a lot of live performances. And the centre is thriving, absolutely thriving, against the trend of other centres in the northeast. So I absolutely believe in that. Does that answer your question? Do you have any, any other comments or? Okay. But it needs someone, usually it needs one leader to emerge, to volunteer themselves, to act as the coordinator, to sort of be the enthusiast, if you like. Usually in most of the case studies, there's one person or one or two people who've taken the load, if you like, and got the whole thing going.